Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. In the last couple of weeks, I've covered firebending, earthbending, and waterbending, so of course, it's time to airbend now. Amy casts a Wear Tear, Fused, and Nick airbends the spell with Angswift Savior. If Amy pays 2 mana to cast the spell from exile, can she cast Wear, Tear, or both? Alright, so the main theme for today's episode is that when you airbend a spell and then recast it, you are not recasting the same spell. As far as the game is concerned, you threw the old spell in the garbage can, exile zone, and then you cast a totally new and unrelated spell. You can cast this new spell in any way that would legally be allowed for you to cast it, but you're casting it for 2 mana instead of paying its mana cost. So let's apply that principle to the example from the original problem statement. If you're casting a Wear Tear from any zone besides your hand, you can't cast both. So we already know that's off the table. Amy could legally cast just Wear or just Tear. Double-faced cards work similarly. If it's a transforming double-faced card like the Rise of Sozin, it is not possible to cast the back face of these, so you would only be able to cast the front face. Check out my video on Battles plus Cascade for a deeper look into that specific scenario. With modal double-faced cards, you can cast either the front half or the back half, but you do have to cast it though. This game term refers only to casting spells. You cannot cast a land, meaning that for double-faced cards where one half is a land, you're unable to cast that half. The same thing is true for adventure cards. You can cast either half unless that half is a land. Because of how adventures work, if you cast the adventure part of one of these cards, you are able to exile it after it resolves and then cast the other half from the exile zone just like normal. Here's another thing you might have wondered about. If you airbend a token, there's a state-based action that makes the token cease to exist before anyone would have a chance to cast it from exile. Likewise, airbend is pretty good against anything that has an X in its mana cost. It's not possible to pay for X when you cast from exile. The airbend mechanic sets the cost at 2. Because you're not paying the cost that involves X when you're casting the spell, the X will be 0. This means that you would be paying 2 mana for a 0/0 hanger backwalker that would die immediately. Another consequence of this is that you cannot use alternative costs when casting a spell from airbend. It's not possible to apply multiple different alternative costs to the casting of a spell, and casting it for 2 mana rather than its mana cost means you've already applied 1. So if you airbend a Shriekmaw, then that Shriekmaw will cost 2 generic mana to cast from exile, and it will not be sacrificed after you play it this way. This is true whether that Shriekmaw was originally cast via Evoke or normally, and the ruling is also the same whether you airbend a Shriekmaw that's a creature on the battlefield or a spell on the stack. In contrast, additional costs and cost reducers work entirely normally, being applied to the alternative cost of 2 mana rather than the spell's normal mana cost. So if you airbend a Katara seeking revenge, it would be possible to waterbend 2 as an additional cost to cast that spell. Unfortunately, it would not be possible to pay for all 4 mana that the spell would cost by tapping creatures. Check out my video on how waterbending works for more details on this ruling. Remember, when you airbend, the game throws away all the information about how you originally cast the spell. Therefore, it does not matter whether you waterbend Katara when you first cast it, you still need to pay again if you want the extra effect. Let's close out with a couple of challenge questions to test your understanding. Amy flashes back a Think Twice, and Nick airbends it. What happens? Alright, so when you airbend a spell, it gets exiled. Flashback sees that card going to the exile zone, so it doesn't try to make it go anywhere else. I talked about this in my video on Narset Transcendent plus Inspiring Refrain. Since Think Twice was exiled with airbend, you can recast it. Since the recast is not achieved by paying the flashback cost, the Think Twice will go to your graveyard as normal when it resolves. Finally, let's say that Amy airbends Nick's Kasali Ambusher and then attacks him. Can Nick flash in his Kasali Ambusher and block? And for this, the answer is unfortunately no. When you're casting the spell off airbend, you need to follow the spell's timing restrictions, just like if you were casting it normally. If Kasali Ambusher had flash naturally, or if something external like this Vidalcan Orrery was giving it flash, Nick would be able to cast it during Amy's turn. But unfortunately, you can only cast Kasali Ambusher as though it had flash if you cast it in a certain way, without paying its mana cost. This means the permission to cast it at instant speed is incompatible with casting it for 2 off the airbending, since that's another alternative cost. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.